Bo Horvat's on the move. Sean Payton's on the move. And both Kelsey brothers are on the move to Arizona. Super Bowl is 2 weeks away. It's Sports QuaranTV. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Sports QuaranTV. Chris, Dobson, Gerry Green. Gerry, we have got a wild show tonight because, of course, now the Super Bowl matchup is set. So you know what? We're going to start there. Instead of starting hockey this week, we're going straight to football. We have our matchups. You know, let's break down the matchups that were last weekend before we get into our Super Bowl picks and predictions. First and foremost, what'd you think of the games this weekend?
San Francisco, Philly, just you couldn't do much with that. The fact that Brock Purdy gets injured early, I don't know if it would have been a factor at all, Chris, because of just the way or the attitude of the Philadelphia defense. I don't think, even if Purdy puts a drive together, if he's lucky enough to do that. But you just saw how brutal they were and how tough they were and how many things they threw at the San Francisco offense. And even when Purdy left and they had somebody come in that could throw the ball, he gets beat up and he gets knocked out. And so they start to talk about there should be a third quarterback on the roster, should expand the roster and have a third guy. It doesn't happen that often, but this was a rare occurrence. And the fact that it's on the spotlight of a conference championship is even more highlighted. But, I thought San Francisco, even in the first half, I felt undisciplined. They seemed frustrated right from the get-go in all three aspects, too. Defense was taking penalties, offense was taking undisciplined penalties, and special teams was taking penalties, too. They took 11 penalties, Chris, for 81 yards, but I think a lot of that came at the end, too. But there was key points during that game that they took penalties at the wrong time to either extend a Philadelphia drive or snuff out one of their drives. There was a small glimmer of hope. And that's the thing we talked about, you and I, last week, whether or not Brock Purdy could go to the East Coast and play. Well, it had nothing to do with the weather and the crowd. Maybe the crowd a little bit, maybe in regards to what plays they wanted to call. But that Philadelphia defense was ready and full marks.
You're absolutely right. And, it's unfortunate because nobody really knew the extent of Brock Purdy's injury when he came on in. But then when Johnson came on in to have to do what he had to do, just looked like obviously he wasn't prepared. You talked about the Philly defense, but it turns out, I think they made the announcement earlier the week that Brock Purdy is out with a torn UCL, which is going to sideline him for 6 months. Now, for anybody who's a baseball fan, that's basically the same as Tommy John surgery in baseball. That's how that's going to play out. But overall, real sad to see that's how the storyline ended with Brock Purdy. You didn't want to see it that way. But overall, we talked about it last week. I mean, yes, it was the number one defense versus the number two defense, but it didn't matter because when you go to Philadelphia and, Philadelphia was well prepared, they were ready to go and there was no stopping them. You didn't get George Kittle into it as quick as you wanted to. I don't think there was anything there. Christian McCaffrey was, he had that one solid, unreal run that put them on the board. But other than that, it wasn't anything special to write home about. But kudos to the Philadelphia Eagles. And, the only thing I won't say is, I have a hard time. I've got a couple friends of mine who are actual Philadelphia Eagles fans. And, I had to listen to them run their mouth for a while. But other than that, it was, it wasn't that good of a game. I felt bad for Brock Purdy and the Niners.
Well, and that's the thing, because then the San Francisco offense became one-dimensional because even when Purdy went back in, he really couldn't throw the ball. So it made it easy for the Philadelphia defense. And it was unfortunate that the game didn't match up to the way we hope it would be. But what did we really expect? A guy that was drafted, a third-string quarterback on a San Francisco team that was the last in the draft taken in whatever year it was. I'm not sure, Chris. And what really did we expect? And, it did come to a screeching halt. But San Francisco had a great season. If Garoppolo was there, maybe a different story. A decent quarterback. I'm not saying Purdy's not a decent quarterback, but somebody with some experience that would know how to take some wear and tear as well. But it was such a disappointing game. I was looking so forward to it. But the second one kind of made up for it as Cincinnati goes into Kansas City. And there's a lot of I think these two teams now have a rivalry under all of a sudden, not all of a sudden. Well, yes, all of a sudden, because of the trash talk that was going back and forth, not between as much as players as well, but then the mayor got involved, which made this one very interesting. But what made this one interesting, Chris, is the officiating. Again, you have Cincinnati taking 9 penalties for 71 yards. And again, doesn't sound like a lot of yards, but it always seemed to happen at the wrong time.
And you're absolutely right. And again, do I think that late hit call on Mahomes at the end of the game? First of all, I think that was the right call. It was unnecessary, but I think, as a defender, and if you're the defensive coordinator, and I felt bad, you saw him going down the tunnel. He was taking a lot of heat for it. But overall, what I thought was really interesting about this game, and I think it was that day they were talking about it, is that when they've gone on in Joe Burrow, I believe that the times they have beaten Kansas City, they were both by 3 points each time. And then Kansas City came out and I thought they were going to get it done. I took Cincy last week. We were talking about it. And overall, to me, anytime a game gets decided by, penalties, as you mentioned, or questionable officiating, I don't want that to be what I remembered it for. But I will say this, and that is kudos to Patrick Mahomes. He came on in with a high ankle sprain, and there was a couple times that ankle looked weak. Like he didn't look like he was still hobbling around a little bit. He's only got to go 2 more weeks to make sure he's okay. But Kansas City did what they had to do to win, and I respect that. And it's not that Joe Burrow looked bad, but he was let down a little bit. I don't know. The game was much better, though, for sure.
Chris, I'm sitting there. It's 2-minute warning. Cincinnati has the ball deep in their own zone. Let's say the 18-yard line, whatever it is. They throw for a first down. They're at the 28. All of a sudden, Burrow goes back to throw a pass, and I have some questions. They say if you're in the pocket and or with inside the hash marks that if you throw it to the ground, it's intentional grounding. I thought it was pretty questionable. And it's a very important play in the game, Chris, and to be calling it right there with all the pressure that he'd been feeling most of the day, that pushes him back against the goal line, and then they had to punt it. And even with the punt, that whole sequence in the last 2 minutes, the punt, there looked like there was some questionable blocks that were made to let the guy run it back as far as he did. And then even on Holmes's run, they said there was holding on the other side of the field that they never called. So it was very disappointing that refereeing, and even for a guy like me, it was certainly they say that you could, if you wanted to, call a penalty on every play in the NFL. But here we're talking about supposedly the best crews against the best teams, and you would hope they have some discretion on what is the right time and wrong time to do whatever they're going to do.
Okay, so now that we know, we've got Kelsey brother versus Kelsey brother. In your opinion, who's winning the Super Bowl? We got Kansas City, Philadelphia. I want your take.
Oh, Philadelphia. I think even Mahomes is going to get a couple weeks rest. I still think Philadelphia is the complete package. And you see, again, Hurts didn't have to do a whole lot in the game. And they really kind of shut him down probably after the third quarter. But it's all about distributing the ball, him run it sometimes, him throw it. And then that solid defense gets you field position, and so you don't have to go that far. I definitely think it's Philadelphia over Kansas City in the Super Bowl.
I agree with you full tilt. I think this will be the easiest route to the Super Bowl the Philadelphia Eagles have taken. It's not even a question, Chris, at this point. Either way, I'm going with you. I think the Eagles will march into Arizona and win the Super Bowl. Gerry, let's move on. We're going to go to hockey at this point. We're going to talk about the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. And that is, we're going to start with the Halifax Mooseheads. I know we talked about them a bit the last couple of weeks, but Halifax is now on a 19-0-2-0 run. This is I'm going to say unbelievable because it is. We knew how good they were going to be. They got themselves better after the trade deadline. Let's talk about it. Like, how's this greatness looking? Ever since Zachary LaRue came back from injury right before the World Junior Tournament as well, and he got healthy. Look, is there any stopping the Mooseheads at this point?
It doesn't appear, Chris, and they're playing good defense. They're getting that from Rousseau, rather. I think Brady James is on the other is a good backup for sure, but I think the bull's been taken by the horns there. You really have, I guess, a quiet defense led by Wynot that I don't really know much about. But when you have the first and second scorers in the league in your lineup, and Zachary LaRue and whoever else you want to mix in there that I'm missing, Boucher and some others, you got a solid top six. And if you got those guys that play their roles in the bottom six, you got a tremendous bit of chemistry. They've won 19-0-2. They've won 10 in a row. They're still behind Quebec in the overall standings, but both of them are in the top 3 of the CHL standings that came out this week, Chris. And some crazy things happened this week, Chris. And I was in Bathurst on on Friday night, and I looked at the out of town scoreboard, and Gatineau was leading Val-d'Or 8-3 after one period to play, and I thought, that can't be true. That cannot be real. And sure enough, it is. So anything in regards to offense, and anything can happen in the postseason. We talked about last week about who we would think, besides the top five, who we would think that might pull ahead. And Moncton had a stinker of a week. They lost to Chicoutimi. They lost to St. John. They lost to Cape Breton. And it's no disrespect on any of those teams, but it's on home ice. And you gave up 18 goals. And then you have to go on the road and face Gatineau, Victo, and Quebec this week. You really made a bed that you're going to have to sleep in now. It's going to be a tough next week for the Moncton Wildcats, who I thought might have been one of those teams that could challenge the top five.
You and I were talking about that week after week. You know, they were a hardworking team. Tough to lose the way they did at home ice. It was Timbits weekend, of course, at the Avenir Center last weekend. So the building was full. Kids were fired up. Didn't matter. The Wildcats, you said they laid an egg. They looked awful. I think the question that I have to ask myself at this point is, could Moncton be in the midst of another coaching change? I mean, you know, if you look over the last couple of years, they don't wait around for things to go completely south. I mean, and again, I don't know, but you got to think at this point, Lacroix could be in the hot seat. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, because I agree. Moncton's a hardworking team. You know, they got Moran back from the CHL prospects game, and I think that's going to help. But overall, you can't stink up the way you did. And I agreed. I thought they were going to be a team that make a little bit of noise in the postseason.
There's one of those teams, Chris, that if you look at 6 through 10, so you got Rouyn-Noranda, Rimouski, Chicoutimi, Shawinigan, and Moncton. Moncton's the only one that added, of all those teams,
right?
All those other teams
Plandowski in.
Moncton, Plandowski, and Trenholm specifically. Right. I mean, it's not a huge ad, but it's still like, you know, we want to see if we can get into the second round is the message I'm getting anyways. I don't think they expect themselves to win a championship with the lineup they had. And who knows sometimes when you get on a run. But of those teams below the bottom 5 to 10, it was only they that added players. So I was hoping a little bit more consistency, and we'll see what this road trip proves. We'll see what it proves. We'll see what Dan Lacroix can get out of them. I still don't hope, and I still think and hope that Dan Lacroix doesn't get put on the hot seat for this. I think the players have to be under consideration in regards to not being prepared. I mean, St. John scored 7 goals. And I mean, like I say, 18 goals against in 3 games. You know, there's got to be something wrong.
Whose job is it to prepare these guys?
Well, I know, but
I get what you're saying.
What you're saying. I'm just saying, I'm just tired of seeing the rotation of, I guess, of coaches behind the Moncton bench. And I thought Dan Lacroix added some stability there.
Anyways, no, I agree with you. I hope they sort it out, because like I said, look, there's nothing wrong with a losing streak, but turn it around and build a little momentum, because if you were going to go on a bit of a slump, now's the time to do it. Get yourself back into the win column there, moving into the postseason. All right, Jerry, we got to move on to the National Hockey League, because big news coming out of Vancouver. Bo Horvat, the captain. What's really interesting about this has finally been traded, by the way. I'll finish my sentence and then I'll go back to it. So Bo Horvat is on his way to Long Island to play with the Islanders, and good for them. Could be a good rental at this point. I don't know what the plan is, with Beauvillier going the other way, protected first-round pick going the other way. Now, what's really interesting about this is this weekend is the NHL All-Star Game, and Bo Horvat was on the All-Star team representing the Vancouver Canucks. Well, they made the announcement that he will still be representing the Vancouver Canucks this weekend, which, you know, fun fact. But either way, the saga is done in Vancouver. Bo Horvat's on the move. What do you think of the trade? I think it's kind of lackluster on both sides, to be honest.
Well, I've never, you know, it's kind of vanilla for me, but, you know, I think of the Islanders as a boring vanilla type of team that you never know what you're going to get from night to night. It's usually a low scoring affair, which is Lou Lamoriello's way. But the fact that Dobson's there is probably the only thing that excites me in anything about to do anything with the
Matty Barzal,
the Islanders. I've heard of Bo Horvat out in Vancouver. Never knew much about him, but he was a first-round pick, 9th overall in 2013, Chris. That was the year of McKinnon going number 1. You remember that? And Barkov going number 2. Sean Monahan was in the top 5, and so was Jonathan Drouin, went number 3.
I thought you were just going to skip right by him.
No, I wasn't going to do that. But you have Sean Monahan now in Montreal, so he was a top 10 pick when it came to the first round picks in 2013. But what I meant to say was Horvat has scored 201 goals in 621 games with the Vancouver Canucks. Only McKinnon, Markov, and Monahan have more goals than he does from that first rounds of 2013. So you got to give him credit where credit is due. And of course, had 30 goals last year, already at 30 this year, has been really consistent in scoring that 20 to 25 goals. I just don't know if you're going to go to the Islanders and still have that freedom to score like you did. He's one of those guys that stands in front of the net, Chris. So if you're going to put him out on the power play or just have him park in front of the net, all the highlight goals, most of them I saw of Horvat, was him sniping it or he's standing in front of the net banging in rebounds.
So another set play they had in Vancouver was that tic-tac-toe one-timer where Horvat would just back up a little bit outside of the blue paint and kind of feed it in from, like, it would go down low and a snap pass right to Horvat. But yeah, I agree with you. That's where he's sniping him from, and he's not far out of the paint. But overall, I mean, anytime you trade your captain away, it's news headline worthy. I think at the end of the day, it's because they knew Horvat wanted out so bad. I know there was a contract dispute starting to come on and have that conversation. Didn't look like he was going to re-sign in Vancouver. That was probably the best offer on the table. What I do have a problem with is the way the Vancouver Canucks, and I understand it, like fans are unhappy in Vancouver. And of course, with the Connor Bedard draft coming up, they wanted explanations, they wanted answers. And management in Vancouver took the podium and say, well, as far as I'm concerned, based off the guys we got, it looks like we got 3 first-round picks for Bo Horvat. And I'm like, first of all, the other 2 guys, they haven't made any noise in the National Hockey League at this point. Not that it's a shot at Beauvillier, because I do like Anthony Beauvillier. I'm just saying that at this point, and again, the brass in Vancouver have to sell it to the fans, because fans are calling for somebody's head at this point. And they made a coaching change, and now anyways. All I know is that good on Bo Horvat. He's in a better situation now in Long Island than he was in Vancouver. I don't think he's going anywhere further than that in Long Island, but overall, that's.
Well, I read an article today, Chris, about Patrick Kane and the fact that he might move or should move or can move or whatever the case may be, and it talked about the Edmonton Oilers acquiring Patrick Kane. Excuse me. I thought to myself, how the heck is the Edmonton Oilers going to be able to acquire Patrick Kane with the money that might be involved with Patrick Kane? You'd have to have a lot of big favors coming from Chicago to offset the value, the money that it would be needed to add Patrick Kane to Edmonton. Now, the other things I want to talk about was in regards to the other guys that I think are going to move. Would that be Timo Meier and also Ryan O'Reilly? I think Erik both Karlsson. Of those. Well, I don't. Erik Karlsson. I hear what you're saying, Chris, but he's of that age and he's got such a big contract. You think he can go somewhere? What I would love to see is Timo Meier go back and be on a team with Nikolai Ehlers with Winnipeg.
I bet you would.
That'd be a perfect setup for them. And Winnipeg could afford it. That's what I mean. I don't know how Edmonton or Toronto continue to talk about making trades. They'd need the other person to make a tremendous amount of compensations for them to be able to acquire anybody that has a high-priced salary.
Okay, so hear me out, because we're talking trade deadline. We're going to go off script a little bit because this is a topic, and you love conspiracy theories, so let me paint one for you. Okay, you talked about the Toronto Maple Leafs. What if, hear me out, what if the Toronto Maple Leafs put Austin Matthews on LTIR? He's out for a month anyway, minimum month. What if they pull a Kucherov? What if they pull a Kucherov with Austin Matthews? They've got $11 million in cap space, prorated, to bring in 2 guys. Look, Kyle Dubas is in the last year. He's got a shot. If he doesn't get out of the second round, he's done. He's fired. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. If he gets through the first one, they'll keep him second round. It's done. Doesn't matter. So if you can go ahead, say you bring in Patrick Kane, say you bring in Jonathan Taves at the same time, work out a 3-way deal, have some salary going back the other way, because they are big contracts. Now you've got the Leafs with who you are. Imagine bringing in those guys. Your power play is going to be lights out. You got Jonathan Taves, the 3rd-line center in Toronto. Goaltending's there. I'm just painting conspiracy. Dubas is going to have to get creative.
He is, because there's no way you can't rely on the other team to be accommodating, so you can build your team. Like you say, Chris, that's an interesting perspective to put Matthews, and all of a sudden he had this knee injury, put him on long-term disability. Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm not trying to play conspiracy theorist, but the Leafs don't have, they have to win. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Dubas has to figure it out. So at the end of the day, the only thing I can think of is if they do this right, they can pull this move off, because the Leafs can win without Austin Matthews. It's not like their standing ranking is going to close. They're going to play Tampa Bay in the first round regardless. It's just a matter of where they're going to play them, in Toronto or in Tampa Bay. So
and very quickly, Chris, quickly, they talked about the Rangers acquiring Kane, and maybe Lafreniere and somebody else goes back to Chicago.
I would absolutely assassinate somebody if you traded Alexis Lafreniere for Patrick Kane at this point in his career. I think that would be foolish. But again, you never know. That's why we're behind a desk, brother, and that's why we are not at the rink. I don't know. Either way, it would be crazy, but it would be really cool to see. I love trade deadline time. Well, Gerry, after all of that, let's close this thing off. It's time to wrap it up. Here we are with a wrap. We're going to start with the Maritime Hockey League. What's the latest?
Well, last week, Chris, we talked about key matchups between first-place teams and second-place teams in both the North and the South, and the result was Yarmouth strengthens itself on top of the Southern Division and the overall standings. As a matter of fact, they've won 11 in a row. They beat Truro last week. And Edmundston and Summerside were supposed to play a pair in Edmundston. Well, they did, kind of. Summerside wins the first one on a Friday night, and then they're supposed to play on Saturday night. Well, they played 2 periods, Chris, and then they had to suspend it because of ice conditions in one end of the arena in Edmundston. No word on when they're going to try to make that up. Edmundston still leads the North by 2 points over 2 teams, Summerside and Campbellton. Games of the week to consider in the MHL this week. Truro comes to the North. They take on Campbellton Friday, in Miramichi Saturday. And then you have Edmundston going to Yarmouth on Saturday night. 2 division leaders meeting in the MHL on Saturday night. That should be fun. Sean Payton has found a new home. Chris, where is it?
Well, very good question, Gerry, and that is, of course, the Denver Broncos. Shockingly, of course, after Russell Wilson had his, I'm not even going to call it mediocre season, terrible season at best, under the expectations were high, they have finalized a deal with the New Orleans Saints, sending the first-round pick, which is the 30th overall, I believe, from the Niners. I believe that's where that came from. But that first-round pick is going to New Orleans, excuse me. I had a brain fart for a minute. Going to New Orleans in exchange for Sean Payton, who will be going back. Sean Payton, of course, has won 1 Super Bowl. Overall record with the Saints is 152-89. Fun fact, though, Gerry, when it comes to coaches who have been traded for first-round picks, Sean Payton is now the 4th, and that is, of course, John Gruden 1, Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells, who are connected, by the way, but overall, interesting to note, 4th head coach in NFL history traded for first-round picks. What about Atlantic University Sport, Gerry? What's going on there?
Well, on a hockey side, Chris, it's winding down. It flies by, don't you know? Here we are into February already. UMB leads the men's standings with a 23-3-2 record. They sit and clinch for a spot. They've won their last 4. St. Mary's has pushed by UPEI, Chris. They've won their last 3 and are 1 point better than PEI, but there's still 4 games left for all the teams. The regular season wraps up on February 11th. Moncton has snapped a losing slide and will find themselves in the playoffs. The game of the week this week, again, it's a 1 versus 2, Chris, as SMU, St. Mary's University, is at UNB on Saturday night at 7 o'clock. That should be fun. And on the women's side, UNB women are still on top of the standings there. They're 19-2-3, and their regular season also ends on February 11th. What about the referees, Chris? Is there something going on in regards to, we've had referees a problem in the NFL. Are they now starting to be a problem in the NBA too?
Pick a sport. I know that there's a lot of hot topics going around, and of course, some of the latest, NFL matchups last weekend. A lot of fans are calling for referees' heads. At least they're holding for accountability. If you look at some of the, I'm not going to call them bad calls, because who am I to make that decision? But at the same time, there were some questionable decisions that were made. But then, as far as the NBA goes, you got to go back to that Lakers game, that Lakers-Celtics game. Again, as much as I hate to see LeBron flopping around as a 40-year-old throwing a tantrum, he did have a legitimate case on his hands. My favorite moment of that entire thing was when Patrick Beverley comes over to the referee with a camera in his hand, showing him the foul that took place. The Lakers, of course, go on to lose that game to the Boston Celtics in overtime. The NHL's had some terrible officiating go around their way. Fans are starting to say this stuff's all scripted, which clearly is not. But at the same time, I don't know what else to say about it, Gerry, other than the fact that it's time that referees are held accountable. It's time to put these guys in front of the media. This goes back years now. In fact, I go back to the worst missed one, I think, was that Minnesota New Orleans Saints game with that brutal PI call that was missed. This has been going on for years. But overall, it's time. Let's hold these guys accountable. Put them in front of the media. Let them ask these questions. Find out, why was that foul called? Why was that penalty flag thrown? I want to know the answers. Fans want to know the answers. Make them held accountable. That's all I'm going to say about that before we get fined. Overall, some sad news coming out. Bobby Hall, unfortunately, has passed away. Chicago Blackhawks legend. What can you say?
Well, from my perspective, Chris, he's more of a Winnipeg Jet legend than he was a Chicago Blackhawk legend. But you're right. He spent, 1,063 games in the NHL and scored 610 goals. He died this week at the age of 84. I remember him very well in my childhood growing up in Winnipeg when he, in the summer of 1972, goes to the corner of Portage and Main and signs a $1 million contract for 10 years to play in the WHA. And what he does, Chris, there is he's a pioneer. He's what really opened the door for everybody, even to this date, to get paid what they got paid. They weren't getting paid anything back in the 70s to play hockey. The WHA and Bobby Hull opened that up. The reports of his off-ice life and the aspects of his off-ice life, I know not much about. I just know what he was like on the ice. And I remember as a 10-year-old going to the Winnipeg Arena, Bobby Hull would come and sign anything and everything, and he wouldn't leave the warm-up, Chris, until every kid had whatever they wanted signed. Usually the Zamboni driver was sitting there waiting for him to get off the ice, but people knew that he was a superstar, and to come to a prairie town and light it up like it did, and to do what he did for all the other players after him in regards to salaries is undisputed. Chris, what about the Raptors? I watch them sometimes I don't. I don't know what's going on with them.
Sometimes there's more than I can say I watch them now, Jerry. What I can tell you at this point is, this is not how the season was supposed to go. I think they were looking at a lot of things to try to ride the high off, the Scotty Barnes rookie year coming into his sophomore season. They've got the talent. The trade deadline is going to be a big question mark for the Raptors and what they're going to do. A lot of rumors are speculating that the Lakers are going to be in on guys like Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., but you got to think they're going to be fielding calls. That's what they're saying right now, because the Lakers are almost in a playoff spot, and they're going to try to make some noise. But these are just where the rumors are linked. I think that'd be foolish of them. Look, the Raptors' biggest problem is they can't shoot the ball. Gary Trent Jr. is their best shooter on the lineup right now. Getting rid of him is just an absolute mistake. I think they should build around him, or even possibly Fred VanVleet. But Scotty Barnes is the guy. That's who you're going to keep. OG apparently wants out now. Anyways, I don't know what's happening in Toronto right now, but they're going to have to get a hold of something real quick because it's about to go downhill real quick. So I hope that they're going to start this rebuild, build around Scotty Barnes, make this thing work for everybody. But overall, that's how I feel about the Raptors right now. That's all I'm going to say about that, man. This has been a great show, Jerry. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next Thursday.